is that throughout history, most of the time, most people have resolved their conflicts peacefully. The first story I started out with is an example. There are many more. Even working in a war zone and being in other war zones, I've worked in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, I've been in Azerbaijan and other places during Troubles, in Moscow. God knows there were plenty of times when things got very dicey. And I could say that in all of those places, I can't really count on one hand the number of times I heard that perhaps some violence was going on around. In other words, most human beings, even in the most dicey places, have the experience of resolving conflicts peacefully without violence. And I think that we get the impression that human beings are always, this dark side is always waiting for us and always out there to give us problem. And some more good news I'd like to end with is that the International Peace Academy in New York has come out with a recent study that shows that since 1992, violence in wars among countries, between countries, is down by 40% since 1992, up until 2005. Now, there's Rwanda, there's Iraq, there are other places where things are pretty horrible and there's internal conflict. But coups have dropped dramatically as well since the 1960s. There are indicators that show us that things are not quite as bad as sometimes it's portrayed when we pick up the newspaper or when we listen to the news. Explanations that they have for this, one of them is, at the top of the list, the proliferation of non-governmental grassroots organizations. In these internal conflicts, just like the people I'm telling you about, the vastly increased UN diplomacy. Nowadays, I understand that the goal in the United Nations is to have every staffer, no matter what their work is, to go through a rather intensive course in conflict resolution so that they should really understand these principles and live by them. And a change in thought about the place of war in international affairs. There seems to be a growing recognition that war really is a pretty lousy way to resolve differences. And people around the world are no longer satisfied with leaving it up to their governments to prevent or stop or mitigate violence. And how we know this is, like I say, the exponential increase in non-governmental organizations all over the world who are organizing in order to make a difference at the non-governmental level. And there are more non-governmental people in the world than there are governmental people. So that always can give me some hope as well. Another thing about these organizations is that they are actually in touch with each other. They're collaborating. They're learning from each other. They're spending time acting together in the Georgian-Abkhaz arena. As I said, there are several organizations that began working there at the same time, and at first we all felt kind of uncomfortable. Oh, they're going to get the funding, not us. Oh, they're going to do it the wrong way and muck it up for us. And the UN looked at us that way too. That is the UN negotiators. The first UN negotiator that we met with when I first came in there to say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do some citizen diplomacy. He said, citizen diplomacy? You're not diplomats. You haven't been trained as diplomats. You know, here we are working very hard for an agreement, and you guys are kind of going to come in and be diplomats too. So I changed the word. From then on, I started talking about citizen peacebuilding, so as not to, get that particular word, that trigger going. But with each new negotiator, we found more and more welcoming. And in fact, the latest negotiator is trying to hire one of the directors of another governmental or non-governmental organization, Conciliation Resources, and this is a guy who has been working with politicians on both sides at the very highest levels. So there you have the UN trying to bring in somebody who's been doing non-governmental work in order to better inform their efforts, and the same kind of development of knowledge of the conflict and sophistication of the nuances by the various ambassadors in the U.S. Embassy.
I just wanted to get your insights about the kind of frozen circumstance you were describing in the Georgia-Abkhazia situation right now. I mean, it sounds in transition, but kind of waiting for another breakthrough, and I'm just wondering what you imagine that might be, or how you can see the next break in that kind of situation.
There are so many of those frozen conflicts around the world, and several of them are in the former Soviet Union. Kosovo is the one that we most hear about, and as you probably know, the Kosovars have already declared that they are an independent country and have been very frustrated with the international community for not finalizing what they had been promised. And largely that's because of the fear that the Russians and the Chinese will not approve, will not vote for independence. And until the back channels come to a conclusion that Russia won't stop the Kosovo independence, it's a place that my folks in my conflict and other frozen conflicts are looking at and saying, okay, if Kosovo can become an independent country, why can't we? And the conversation goes something like this: the international community that supports Kosovo's independence but not the others is saying the extent of bloodshed was greater, that these other places don't fit the 4 criteria. And one of the criteria is that there is, was terrible bloodshed, and that the 2 sides can't live together again, that they form a cohesive nationality that is Kosovars, and I forget what the 4th one is, that it's the territorial boundaries are clear, something like that. Well, if you look at each and every one of those frozen conflicts, all those criteria fit in almost every case. It's just to one degree or another. So certainly there is an inconsistency. And what happens to Kosovo officially may be the breakthrough for Abkhazia, Georgia, and the others in the former Soviet Union. But it also could become a major conflict between Russia and the US over it. So it's tricky. And I feel pretty firmly that until the Georgian side is willing to allow the international community to become more neutral in its facilitation, there will not be movement in that situation. And, war was tried once, and it didn't work. So there's no chance that war again is going to solve the problems.
I watched it in the university as we moved from integrating and starting to become less mindful of race and religion, and now we're back, and we have at the campuses people wanting to have the Asian dorm, the Italian dorm. I mean, it was a very interesting separation that I've watched taking place in the last few years. It seems to me it's on a world resolution, and I can't help being concerned that it's the wrong direction.
It is a worrisome trend, and I find myself asking the same kinds of questions. Over the years, I've watched my Abkhaz friends and the citizens of that area that I felt from the ceasefire were angels.